Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all for yet another interesting Friday lecture by Team CSP. On behalf of Professor Sangeeta Menon, the Head and Dean, NIAS CSP, and of course our team, I invite you all for such, I think, a very good lecture planned for us on cognition, consciousness, and emotions. So without a further ado, I'll request Meera Kumar Menon, a doctoral scholar with Team CSP, to please kindly introduce the speaker of today. Meera, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Niharika, and welcome everyone. It is an honor to introduce you, sir, today. Dr. Dhananjay Singh is a professor of English at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, where he teaches courses on comparative poetics, Indian aesthetics, Indian philosophy of language and theatre, modernist poetry, and modern Irish literature based on his research in these fields. He has published research articles and essays in these areas. He is the author of Fables in the Indian Narrative Tradition, an analytical study, and the Poetics of Theatre in Early India. He was visiting professor at University of Bergamo, Italy in 2014, international visiting fellow at Grinnell College, USA, and visiting research fellow at Trinity Long Room Hub, Trinity College Dublin in 2017. His poems have appeared in Muse India and the South Asian Ensemble. For his research on Seamus Heaney and Buddhist epistemology in a comparative framework, he was awarded research secondment by the European Union's Marie Curie International Research Exchange Scheme to the project Social Performance, Cultural Trauma, and Re-establishing Solid Sovereignties at Trinity College Dublin. His poems have also appeared in Muse India and South Asian Ensemble. His debut short story, The Train and the Tunnel, has appeared in the Bombay Review in August 2020. So it is indeed a great pleasure and honor to welcome you, sir. Please request you to begin your lecture.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure. Professor Menon, Dr. Saurav, thank you for having me. So yes, I'll straightway come to the subject, of course, of which I'm not an expert, but I come from English studies, as you know. But I do, teach Natya Shastra partly, and I'm greatly interested in the questions and the ideas on performance and related to aspects of Indian philosophy. So, the title of my talk, of course, Emotion, Cognition, and Consciousness, and to discuss about a continuum as far as the hermeneutic tradition is concerned. So there's been a very strong hermeneutic tradition in India. It's one of the chief, aspects of the intellectual tradition, which of course is also, responsible for the fact that there's no question of hierarchy and no question of originality in Indian tradition, in the Indian intellectual tradition, which is why the commentaries are very important. There's a great tradition of commentaries. So, for instance, Nagarjuna's Mool Madhyam Karika is a commentary on Buddha's Kachayana Gota Sutta, but then it has its own importance as such, independent importance. In the same way, in the literary tradition, or in the theatre tradition, or in the theatre thought tradition, Abhinavagupta, Bhattanayaka, Sri Shankuka, these are extremely important names, not because they are in a way they elucidate the theory of Rasa that we find in for the first time in Bharata Natya Shastra, but because they exist as independent or autonomous statements of thought. So I have 30 to 40 minutes, in fact, and I'll try to kind of touch upon the important points within 30-40 minutes, and we have something to discuss, of course. Now, the basis of my talk, of course, is the Rasa Sutra, as I said, a key statement in Natya Shastra, Bharata's Natya Shastra. Dates are very difficult in the tradition because obviously we're not biographical people in that sense, and not important event. But on the basis of references in the text, we get to know a chronology. So we have rather chronology of ideas, ideas in text, than history based on dates. It's not important at all. Natya Shastra, of course, has a long tradition even before Bharata, and the evidence is in the text. A long performative tradition, even before Bharata comes, somewhere in between 2nd century BC to 2nd century AD. Without wasting much time, let me come to the Rasa Sutra. And the Rasa Sutra, of course, is in the 6th chapter of Natya Shastra, Vibhava, Anubhava, Vibhichari Bhava, Samyoga, Rasa. So the key terms, of course, is an important, very significant statement, which has its ramifications not only in the theory of theatre but also in poetry. In English studies, whenever we do modernism and modernist literature, I often talk to my students about let's say Eliot's concept of objective correlative and how close it is to Natya Shastra. Eliot found Hamlet to be a failure. He thought Macbeth was better than Hamlet, and Hamlet was a failure because he argued in his essay Hamlet and His Problems that the psychological trauma, the conflict in Hamlet, the conflict that is caused by the fact that his mother was disloyal, to his father, and then he had in fact conspired, with his uncle Claudius to kill his father. That trauma, that psychological state of being, could not be represented adequately by Shakespeare through a chain of events, symbols, images, etc. That's how he defines his concept of objective correlative. So for him, Hamlet is a failure because it lacks what he calls objective correlative. Now, when we go to Bharata Natya Shastra, and somebody might say, okay, why do you go to Eliot and then come to Bharata Natya Shastra? We are older than Eliot, but then of course we're talking of conjunction of ideas. Now, this is what it is. This what theatre is according to Bharata, which is samyoga, of course. And there's a lot of discussion in the hermeneutic tradition that I just referred to, the main figures, as to what exactly Bharata means by samyoga. Bharata was, of course, a practitioner of theatre. He was not as much interested in kind of interpretation, or not as much interested as to what philosophical understandings or interpretations anybody would draw out of the perspectives that are so embedded in this statement. So that the basic debate that this statement gives rise to is samyoga and nishpatti. Let me again repeat: vibhava, anubhava, vyabhichari bhava, samyoga, nishpatti. Now, ras nishpatti, sorry. So the main concepts are vibhava, anubhava, vyabhichari bhava. And I hope there's some kind of, some background with Natya Shastra, or then I have to somehow refer to it within my talk. Rasa is a key word. Rasa is a key word. Is a key word in theatre, is a key word in poetry after Anandavardhana, mostly after Anandavardhana, who composed Dhvanyaloka in 9th, 10th century. And Abhinavagupta writes another commentary on Dhvanyaloka, uses elements from Kashmir Shaivism. Now, Rasa is what is Rasa? Rasa, everybody knows what Rasa is, and that's the strength of Indian thought, because perhaps all texts were written down, but perhaps we are so predominant in oral tradition that is important to use terms which were familiar in our day-to-day experiences as philosophical theoretical terms. So Rasa, everyone knows what Rasa is the same Rasa as Rasa was then, and the same Rasa that Rasa was of, let's say, mango, and same Rasa that Bharata refers to as Rasa. Now, let me start with the. Let me talk about this Rasa as such, and then we'll see how it's related. Now, as you know, even when it comes to taste, let's say, taste of any object, taste of an edible object, invariably, more often than not, we'll find that when we are given something to eat and something which we love a particular, let's say, dish, or that I'm so fond of, and if it comes in small quantity, let's say if I actually am very fond of, let's say, rasgulla. I'll just give you a basic example, and there's just one, and we have parted it into three because of three people, and it's something that I really like. What will happen is this, that I would rather nimble rather than eat, and I'll eat very slowly. Or if I love it, if I'm offered food, the thing that I love most would be the one that I'll eat at last. It's just, especially among kids, this is a habit. So you just keep it in the corner because you want to eat at the last, and you nimble, rather than eat. Why? Because that moment of taste, when you taste an object, what actually happens in deep consciousness is this, that you are tasting yourself, is that it somehow leads to that moment, that exact moment when a bit of his taste that you taste it, your sense organs taste it, it manifests in the deep consciousness, the sense of self. And these are the moments that happen exactly in literature. All these theories, they refer to, even Bharata refers to Rasa as a combination. The example that he gives, of course, can be compared to rasam as such, that you mix a lot of elements, and then the end result is a taste which cannot be reduced to any particular object or ingredient within that dish or sauce or anything that one cooks. Abhinavagupta, Bhattanayaka, they refer to, let's say, three kinds of experiences. One, of course, is an experience of the sense of tasting an object, let's say. The second experience is that a mystic experience of a mystic, and then you have the theater experience or experience of literature. To Abhinavagupta, the experience of theater or poetry is a greater experience because it does not involve the pain that one has to go through to attain the experience of the self, or ananda, or bliss, or chamatkar. I'll come to these terms later on. Therefore, because theater or poetry or kavya has a technique that the spectator and the reader, if it's poetry, who is an equal participant in the acts of creation, comes to experience ananda without undergoing the pain or austerity that a saint or a monk might go through. There's a poem quoted by Anandavardhana, and this comes from Dharmakirti. Dharmakirti was a Buddhist, and there Anandavardhana is talking about rasadhvani in poetry. So in poetry, unlike in literature, the language attains that function to universalize experience. I'll come to that, with reference to Bhattanayaka and sometime and his term, the use of term bhavana. But what Anandavardhana, actually, he quotes a passage from Dharmakirti, and it says, and the context is this, that lovers, of course, a young man and a young woman, they are in a forest, and the young man sees the parrot, and the parrot actually, nibbles at a cherry, and the young man, who is a poet, of course, says that, and I'm paraphrasing it here. He says that what austerity and on what mountain this parrot must have performed in his last life, that he gets to eat or kind of, nibble at the cherry, which is as pink as your lip. So it's a kind of erotic Shringara Rasa poem. The point that is indicated here is just that, through the poem, is this, that in the mystic experience, one has to go through austerity on a mountain perhaps. And literature or theater gives that experience to the audience, to the spectator or the reader, and therefore for him, theater experience is a preferable experience than a mystic experience. Before I move further, when I talk about sort of traveling from cognition, from emotion to cognition to consciousness, let me make this statement over here that in the theater experience that Bharata talks about, one freely moves from, as far as the spectator is concerned, one moves from the physical world to the physical world, which also involves his personal experiences, to the metaphysical world, and forth and back. That's the experience of theater, and that ultimately results into the experience of rasa. Now, before I move further, I would like to draw upon a concept from the philosophy of language. Abhinavagupta, as I said sometime back, is also known for his commentary on Dhvanyaloka. And in his Abhinavabharati is the commentary on Bharata's Natya Shastra. He draws upon Bhartrhari, of course, the 5th century grammarian philosopher. Now, why I am drawing it? Because I'm trying to connect language, sound with the ingredients of theater. By ingredients of theater, I mean what happens on the stage, what is required for performance of a play. Now, that philosophy of language, in fact, in all schools of thought, especially grammarians, as the sound that one utters, the sound that I'm speaking right now, and the sound that you are hearing right now, which is coming in layers in sequence, is never the original sound, An example which is given is that of, let's say, a body of water, a lake or a pond, place it, and I throw a stone in the middle of the pond. Now what happens? There are ripples and there are waves. And the waves after wave, wave after wave, it reaches the shore. The wave that reaches the shore is a wave that is born out of wave. It's not born out of stone. It's born out of wave. So the language that I speak, the sound that I speak right now, and the sound that I hear right now are sounds that are born out of sounds, are not sounds. That's the insight. Akash or space is a substance. Is one of the substances in Nyaya Vaisheshika, and the sound is an aspect of space. A sound is atomic, sound is everywhere. What the organs of articulation do is that they amass the already existing sounds. So the sounds that you hear are the sounds that already exist. Now, what happens in theater? What happens in theater when we are moving from the text to the stage, is this: that there's nothing original. And what is presented is already presented as such. I'm not saying in terms of the universality of themes as such. What I'm talking about is the meanings, the impressions, the emotions, the feelings, realized as particular, with particular context, which already exist as such. That's why the pleasure in theater and the pleasure in poetry is due to the fact that we are at the same time creating meanings, at the same time as the actor is performing on stage, or at the same time as perhaps the words appear on the page in a book, I as a reader am also creating. And creating involves freedom of consciousness. And that's why there is pleasure. That's one perspective. That's how I see it. Now, let me go back to the important terms in this one statement. This is just one statement. To repeat, vibhava, anubhava, vichari bhava, samyoga, rasa, nishpatti. But this one statement has produced a rich body of theoretical and philosophical literature, because there are debates, of course. Let me touch upon the major concepts, and then I'll come to interpretation, and then possibly we'll go to discussion later on. Yes. Now, the first term, of course, is vibhava. Vibhava, anubhava, vyabhichari bhava. The thing to realize is this, that when one is watching the performance of a play, what is it that's happening in the consciousness of the spectator? What is it that connects the spectator to the stage? What we have on the stage is a word spoken by the actor, Vachik Abhinay, Ahare Abhinay, the dress, the music, of course, Angik Abhinay, the body movements, and Satvik Abhinay, which is a motion of the mind. Motion of the mind, that's what it is. Therefore, the most difficult thing to enact, of course, think of any scene, for instance, the most difficult thing to enact is a Satvik Abhinay, because obviously you can enact the speech. The speech is not the speech that is there in the text, but we don't have time for that. If there's a question, then of course I'll take it up. The speech spoken on the stage is not the speech that's there in the script or in the play. Angik Abhinay is all right, because obviously is the actor who has studied the character. Now, whatever is there in the text before it comes to the stage, is vibhava. Bharata uses it as vibhava. If we compare it to the life situation, to the empirical situation, the ordinary life situation, an event, a situation, a symbol, an image, a song, a sound, leaves an impact on us. So it causes an experience. Similarly, all that causes an experience in a text is termed as vibhava. But Bharata does not, and that comes in the discussion, Bharata does not calls it karana. He doesn't call it karana. But he invents a different term called vibhava. Why? And it can be connected to the end of theater, which is this, that the end of theater is to realize that consciousness, realize that chamatkara, realize the absolute self. And therefore, the basic material of literature, because before it goes to theater stage, it's literature after all, it has to be read. The basic material of literature and theater, though it reflects upon an experience in life, but it's closer to our inner mental experience. And therefore, he does not use the term karan, but he calls it vibhava. Vibhava because an experience in daily life, in ordinary life, let's say, having been transformed by the genius of the writer into a form that is amenable to the realization of the self. So that's what vibhava is, and the creation of vibhava is the is responsible with the writer, as in the greatness of the writer can be ascertained on the basis of the newness and the strangeness of the vibhavas that he or she can create. Now, next, the second term is anubhava. Anubhava is again a new coinage by Bharata. He does not, he doesn't call it karya. So it's not an effect. It's not the empirical effect. But what anubhava is this, that you see, when when the text moves from let's say the book, for instance, to the stage, the actor has to, of course, and herein lies the ability of the actor, has to master all possible science of speech, science of body, science of sound, science of movement, that can communicate the vibhavas that are there in the text. And that is the responsibility of the actor. So we have vibhava, anubhava, and vyabhichari bhava. Vyabhichari bhava is a third very important term. It's also bhava. Let me come to the meaning of bhava first. The vibhava and anubhava are not bhava as such, because they're material, they're textual. The meaning of bhava, of course, is, it comes from the root bhu, which can be translated as being as such, being, to become somebody, to become a state of mind. And therefore, Bharata makes two broad categories of it: sthai bhava and vyabhichari bhava. Now let me make this distinction clear, and then from there we'll proceed to I think I have 10-30 minutes more. We'll proceed to the debate and try to summarize in 10 minutes, possibly, if possible. Vyabhichari bhavas are, of course, the impressions, the mental impressions, or let's say psychophysical impressions that are due to one's the experiences in life. When an actor is given a script and an actor has to communicate the meanings of the text, what does the actor fall back upon? The actor depends upon the similar experiences, which the actor may not be able to perhaps consciously retrieve, but subconsciously. Similar experiences. By similar experiences, I don't mean particularity of an event. What I mean is a particularity of the feelings, particularity of the similar feelings that this particular experience that he is going to enact on the stage is going to produce. What the actor does is this, that the term in Mimamsa is vasana, of course. What she does is this, that she retrieves from her memory all such impressions of experiences that she has undergone in the past, or perhaps in the past life. That's what Abhinavagupta says, and uses it as an instrument of performance. Sthai bhava, on the other hand, I'm making a distinction between two categories of bhava. That is why one of the questions that comes up later on in the interpretation of this sentence, of this statement, vibhava, anubhava, vyabhichari bhava, samyoga rash nishpatti. The question that is asked later on is this, that sthai bhava, if you can, is it translated, sthai bhava, permanent state of being. Now, permanent state of being, which are 8 or 9 in us, which are innate, right? Which are basically the substratum of our aesthetic consciousness, if they are so important, because they are the individual self, after all, if they are so important, why is it that Bharata does not name sthai bhava in the statement of Rasa theory? The point is this, that sthai bhava, since it is psychological, since it is a state of being itself, since it is a state of being one of the 9, for instance, rati or shok, it cannot be brought down to the level of language and logic. But there is vyabhichari bhava. Vyabhichari bhava results out of the experiences of the actor's life. The last category, which is important for us, and then we'll go to the philosophical debate, is Satvik Bhava. Satvik Bhava is again not named in the definition because it's again extremely difficult to manifest on the stage through the use of language, body, or music. Satvik Bhava is a movement of the mind, a motion of the mind. Sometimes, when one undergoes an experience, and it's the most difficult thing for an actor to represent on stage. Not every actor can represent Satvik Bhava. How is it? For me, Irfan Khan was my favorite in that. How is it that the motion of the mind, which does not find any effect, any perceptible effect in the body, be communicated by an actor? Is it possible for an actor to communicate something which has just traveled in his mind? That is what is Satvik Bhava. And corresponding to Satvik Bhava is Satvik Abhinay. Now, this is what is the stage. The debate, of course, is how is it that the spectator, as I said, in the theater hall, move from perception on the stage to consciousness of the meaning, or consciousness of meaning, of course, also in Abhinavagupta it means Ananda or Chamatkar or Vimarshik, or also calls it Vimarsh. I hope we have some time to explain this. Now, in between, of course, there are other theories, other philosophers, Mimamsa, Sankhya, and Nyaya. So what is it that happens to an spectator? The question is that what happens to the spectator in the theater house or in the movie hall, and why does it happen so? Why does it happen so? The spectator comes to see the body movement on the stage, the music in the background, gestures on the body, gestures on the face as such, right? Face is a substratum, in fact, substratum of performance. Gestures appear and disappear. And how does how does it lead to what Abhinavagupta calls consciousness? The thing is this, that you might all be aware of, is this, that the end of philosophy, of course, for Abhinavagupta, of course, is a realization of consciousness, is a realization of absolute consciousness. One concept that I would like to bring in here, which I'm bringing from Sankhya, is that of tanmatra. The physical world, which is constituted of the gross elements, earth, air, fire, water, and space, are in fact, as per the Sankhya philosophy, result from the tanmatra, the subtle elements, of course, which is sound, sight, touch, etc., taste, etc. What happens during theater, and it's the power of performance, is that even as we, as spectators, watch the performance, what is happening in this psychological experience is this, that we are receiving the tanmatras. We receive the tanmatras, the subtle sound, and in some of the philosophies, especially again with Sankhya, it is a three gunas, for instance, sattva, rajas, and tamas. I don't have time for it. In discussion, possibly we can talk of it. Is that all objects in the external world, as well as our empirical self, just the empirical self. The empirical self in Sankhya, and it is maintained in other philosophies, is constituted of buddhi, ahankara, and mana. Man is not mind in the Western tradition. Buddhi, ahankara, buddhi is roughly translated as intellect. ahankara as ego, and mana as mind. So these three internal apparatuses, let's say, of the empirical self, as well as the objective world, as well as the object of the objective worlds, are constituted by the dynamic interaction between the three basic constituents of nature or of world, that is the three gunas. Therefore, there is obviously an innate relationship between the empirical self, between the elements that constitute the empirical self. I'm not talking about the universalized self or the absolute self. The aim of theater is to realize the absolute self, the universal self, perhaps with a capital U. What I'm talking of here is the empirical self, the chit as such, the chit which becomes after a pratibimb of the absolute self. What I'm trying to say here is this, that the chit, the empirical self, with its three elements of intellect or intelligence, ego, and mind, mana, is constituted of the same dynamic interaction between three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, as the entire physical world is. Therefore, when we are watching a theater experience, and on the stage, we may have a physical fact, but due to music is one of the reasons. Due to music, due to the fact that our self starts universalizing itself in theater, due to the power of performance. Let me wait here for 1 minute and come back to the point that I'm talking. Bhattanayaka is extremely important thinker before Abhinavagupta. Abhinavagupta accepts most of his thesis. Bhattanayaka has a concept called bhavana that he borrows from Mimamsa. The meaning of bhavana in Mimamsa, in Jaimini Sutra, is this, that the end of every statement is action. There is nothing but action in a statement. Now that action may not be implicated in a statement, but after all, the end of any utterance is action. Now, Bhattanayaka brings this concept from Mimamsa, and he formulates a theory of literary language by which he says that literary language has this unique ability, and he compares the literary language for poetry with Abhinay on stage. What he says that it's a unique ability, and this ability is not because of the use of symbols or something which is extraordinary linguistically, but this is any language, when it becomes literary, when it becomes a part of a great masterpiece, has an ability to universalize experience. The catch is this, that when I'm reading a text or watching a performance, the power of performance and the power of language makes it a universal statement, but I relate to it personally. Therefore, Sri Shankuka is another philosopher who says, using this concept of doubt and concept of recognition, he says that the meaning in a theater house is half there and half created by everybody sitting in the theater house. So if you're watching King Lear on stage and there are 50 people, there are 50 King Lear out there, because everyone is constructing his own King Lear. Half of it is there on the stage. Now, what I was trying to say is this, that it's because of the power of performance, because of the power of literary language, what the audience has a universal experience. Universal experience in what sense? Because the power, the effect of it, the effect of the language makes it possible for the audience to perceive not the gross aspects of what he's seeing on stage, but the subtle aspect of it, and that is how sattva, rajas, and tamas, the three elements of the empirical self, come to have interactions, not with a reference to and not with an objective reference, but come to have an interaction within themselves. That is a thesis of Bhattanayaka, and Abhinavagupta, of course, would take it further from there, and the argument, his argument, if I can summarize in 2-3 minutes, is this: that in theater, because of all these elements, vibhava, anubhava, vyabhichari bhava, and abhinaya, of course, and vritti is a very important concept. I don't have time to talk about it. The concept of vritti would take us back to the originary moment in consciousness, where our basic forms of behavior were produced. Therefore, the concept of vritti is very seminal to the concept of abhinaya. There are 4 abhinayas and there are 4 vrittis. And Bharata uses the narrative. I don't call it myth, because once you call it myth, then you bring in history and then you say it's false. It's not. I mean, it's not in the sense, it doesn't matter to people, actually. That's what it is. You know, all these terms have their own history, as you know. I don't go to the all sorts of debate about the hita, aisa tha. I don't believe in all this. The point that I'm trying to say is this: that is a narrative that he uses of Vishnu in Natyashastra, and talks about the 4 originary moments where 4 general, or 4, not general, sorry, 4 basic and 4 most instinctual types of human behavior emerged, of speech, right, of aharya, of consciousness, and how that has influenced Abhinay. So what Abhinavagupta, of course, argues is this: that the experience of theater or the experience of poetry is a perceptual experience. Actually, before him, there's a debate whether what we see on stage and what we actually realize as audience or as spectator is due to perception. Shankuka, who comes from the, or who is kind of uses terms from the Nyaya, he says that, well, yes, this is perception. What we see on stage, it's perception. I'm seeing King Lear being there on stage, or I'm seeing Rama on stage. But then he says, is this, but I can't see the sthai bhava of Lear on stage. So what I do is this, that I infer the sthai bhava, or the permanent psychological or permanent emotion of Lear in this particular scene. So through perception and inference, I actually create the meaning of theater in the theater hall, which is of course rejected by Bhattanayaka. But Abhinavagupta comes in and he kind of presents this argument that yes, the theater experience is an experience of perception. In fact, perception, what else it is if it's not perception? Because we're perceiving. But then he says that, but this perception is not the perception of through the eye as such, or the ear, but this is a perception of mind as such. Is it possible for us to perceive our mental movements or mind movements? Theater, after all, is a psychophysical experience. So of course, he'll argue that theater, because of its unique or intrinsic power of performance, makes it possible for us to taste, is a term that he uses, translated, taste the mental movements, in fact. And what it does ultimately, of course, is this: because it has the power to universalize experience. The one who watches a performance becomes a universal self, and what he watches becomes a universal object as such. And since there is music, of course, the music creates that deep impact. That what it ultimately results in is an experience of chamatkar. What is an experience of chamatkar? Is it possible to experience one's self? Of course, it's extremely difficult to experience one's self. Only in mysticism, or the mystic experience, or in theater is possible, because we need, if one wants to experience the self, what is the instrument to experience one's self as such? Since it is possible, that's why, you see, that's what the related question, I'll just, this is my last sentence, is this that, why is it that karuna, why is it that vibhatsa, why is it that bhayanak? These are the experiences nobody would like Karunan experience, that nobody would like to be sad, nobody would like to be shocked and horrified. Disgust seems to be negative emotion. Now, why is it in theater one or in great literature one enjoys, or one has an experience of pleasure reading a great story or watching a great performance that has a theme of disgust, let's say, for instance, vibhatsa or bhayanak? Why? Because what Abhinavagupta would say is this: these are the 8 or 9, let's say, innate states of being. We can experience vibhatsa because the form of self is innate to us, and anything that is innate or that is internal or that belongs to us cannot be an experience of pain. The thing is this, that is he who says this, is this that we find the experience of sadness or karuna as a disturbing experience because we are limited in our individuality in terms of time, space, and relations. That's what causes pain. But sadness or sorrow or shoka in itself, since it's a part of ourself, not part of ourself, since it is a manifestation of ourself after all, how can it be, it can produce discomforting experience? And that's why that's the reason, for instance, that even vibhatsa and bhayanak and karuna is an experience of ananda in theatre. That's what, sir. I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for a very wonderful lecture. Now we can open the floor for discussion. So you can either type it out in the chat box, or if you wish to speak, you can just raise your hands in the table, or you can even write it down in the chat box if you want to speak. So please feel free to comment or discuss or ask questions. We'll start with Meera. She has a question or maybe a comment. Meera will let us know. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Meera.
So thank you very much for that very, very good lecture. So I had questions. One was about the nature of the spoken word in theater, which you did not elaborate, but I would love to hear more on that. And then the next one is you spoke about an experience of the universal self and also about an experience of oneself in theater. So are these the same things? What differentiates them, and how are these experienced? The experience of the universal self and the experience of one's self in theater. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, thank you for the wonderful question. In fact, yes. So I was referring to the distinction between Vachik Abhinay, Shabd, that's what it is. So when it becomes the language of theater, it becomes Vachik Abhinay. Now, yeah, the basic thing is somebody might say that, yeah, this is the line that I read, and this is the line that that an actor speaks or performs on stage. What is the difference after all? The same line after all? No, it's not the same line, of course. Why is it not the same line? Because, and this is very interesting, in fact, is that and this goes to the philosophy of language in Bharata and others, and I've already touched upon when I'm talking about sound as such. It's because, we are very limited in the sense that, and that's why in poetry we keep on repeating. Repetition is a very important device in poetry. Not in poetry, we repeat sometimes. When we get very excited to say something, we go and tell our friends, invariably we'll repeat without being conscious of it. Why do we repeat after all? We repeat because we are so excited with the experience. Subconsciously, we are aware that the language that I'm using, the word that I'm using, is not sufficient enough, is not enough to communicate the depth of the experience or the complexity of the experience that I have. Therefore, I repeat. That subconscious. Now, what happens? That's what theater is a very significant form in all cultures, as you know. What happens in theater is this, that it fulfills those gaps as such. Gap is not the right way to put it. What I'm trying to say here is this, that the line in the text or the sentence in the text intends to communicate a meaning. What is available on stage, apart from other things, of course, apart from the body, of course, body is very important, because when you're excited, you also move, because you want to communicate, and that it's very important. So one is the body, and then there's the music as such. And therefore, for angik abhinay, and then you have music, of course, atodya and gan atodya and angik abhinay. Now, when all this interact, basically, then the vachik, the shabda that of the text no longer remains a shabda. It's like the hand. Let's say I'm moving my hand, but I'm not dancing it. Let's say if I was a dancer, I'll move my hand, right? Now my hand, the hand, there's a very what do you say, important poet, 20th century, Paul Valéry, symbolist. He has an essay called Poetry and Abstract Thought. And he says that the difference between poetry and prose is that of dancing and walking. So prose is like walking and poetry is like dancing. The thing is this, that the hand that dances is not the hand that is with me when I walk, right? It's the same hand materially, but it's different. So it attains us that value of added signification. Now that is what happens in theater. That's what happens in theater. And the second thing is that of universal self and one's self, of course. Now, one's self is an individual self, obviously. It's the empirical self as such. In reading of literature, and in watching a play, as we are on a flow, and gradually, all the factors of limitations, in fact, of time, of space, of action, of relations, as they disappear, that is why, if I can give you a basic ordinary day-to-day example, sometimes when at least when I was sometimes in student, when you're very upset, your friends come and say, let's go and watch a movie, and and if you're very sad, of course they'll say, come on, let's go and watch a movie, mood theek karte hain, and you go and watch a movie, and then you forget it. But if the movie is boring, then of course you come back to and keep thinking about it. Now that's what is a power of theater. Now that is individual self. When you talk of universal self, is in the process. Obviously, the individual self is universalized in theater. When one realizes the sthai bhava, if I want to remain with the theater theory, rasa is an absolute self. Obviously, the rasa is the universal self as such. That's what rasa would be. And therefore, Abhinavagupta, when he brings in Shanta, he says that there's just one rasa, Shanta, of course, and Shantam is the universal for him. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Before moving on to Rakesh, I see your hand raised, but before that, I'll just read out one question from the chat box. So we'll simultaneously take it. So the question is from Mr. Dilip HR. Can Indian critical approach be applied to Shakespeare? Should we not take cultural situation in mind? So.
Well, yes.
So would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, certainly. Why? No, cultural. It depends what you're doing. That's what it depends. What are your questions? Your question depends upon the questions, basically. If I read Shakespeare and I want to do a literary sociological analysis of a particular experience, Indian experience, and then I draw upon Shakespeare, or conversely I do, then it's a problem. We have talked about, we have been using all the Western concepts and theories, and we're trying to make mess of our literary understanding. I'm not saying, sorry, I'm not serious, but the point is this, that cross-cultural, experiences of literary interpretations are very important, according to me. And certainly, yes, it's theater after all. It has been applied, certainly. Yeah, but not obviously, but one has to be careful. But yes, because it's theater experience after all. Yeah.
Okay, I'll request Rakesh to please speak up his question. Then I'll take the questions in the chat box. Rakesh, please.
Yeah. Thank you, sir, for this wonderful lecture. I have like two connected questions. One Meera has already asked, but I have like very different perspective what Meera has asked about this universal and one individual self. And the one other question is that about this word and importance of language. When we watch some mimes or on theater where there is no words, no sounds, no music behind that, in that case also we enjoy the performance. Even if some performing painting, like just see like somebody has draw a painting of somebody dancing. So this kind of performance we still enjoys. So how will you praise the word and language in that context? So enjoy the performance. And the another question is that when we talk about this, can the universal consciousness or universal self and the individual self be experienced at the same point of time? Like suppose if I take example, when a group of people used to hunt together, so they used to model somebody's other person's state of mind or mental state and act according to that. And at the same time, they are aware about their skills, their knowledge. So they are both enjoying like dealing with both the universal model of this and the individual models. Is it possible in theater or it is happening in theater? Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So I think the first one was also individual or universal, right? So let me start with this one, the universal and the individual. There's no kind of dichotomy as such. It's all kind of continuum. That's why I say continuum. And a very important example that you've given. What happens? That's my view. Is this that you have vyabhichari bhava? That's what we talked about, right? It's a category that Bharata names in the Rasa statement, the first statement. There are 33. There are 33, and I said that they are based on life experiences, impressions from the life experiences. And then there's Sai Bhava. And the experience or realization of Sai Bhava is Rasa, is a universal consciousness. That's what we talk about. So it depends upon the kind of play, the kind of performance. The transference from individual to universal is bound to happen. Even in theater or in literature that question universality, because they say that this is a particular experience, particular individual experience. Even in such performance, there's always a feeling of a community. So it's bound to happen that one will experience some sort of a kind of a, not transcendence, but a movement from a limited individual to some sort of a communitarian feeling as such. If the subject is extremely socio-politically very radical, let's say, very disturbing, for instance, which is also very significant, of course, more so in contemporary times. You will find that that is more the vyabhichari bhavas, in fact. Those at that level one can, in fact, but even then there is some sort of a movement from the individual, certainly, because in all sorts of experiences one is moving towards a community feeling, actually. So that's bound to happen. A very important question on plays or performance and pantomime when you don't have words, right? Now the thing is this, that word is not simply the sound that we produce. Word is also the sound that we cannot produce. Therefore, we may not call it word, we may not call it verbal, but there will be certainly be language in a way. I hope you understand the way I'm trying to say, because a lot of communication also happens within. So there's a different sort of communication altogether. It's non-verbal, it's gestural, but then you interpret gestures. You see, some sort of a I don't want to call it non-verbal, because that actually takes away the aesthetic part of it. There's one very important concept in the Upanishads, which is this, which brings us to silence, the concept of silence, which is this, that the word, any word which is uttered, three parts of the words are audible, one part is inaudible because it cannot be uttered, or it can be conversed also, right? In some way it's opposite. So what is the silence part? In poetry, or in theater, let's say Beckett, you're watching Beckett, right? Silence is very important. It's very, very important. But what is silence after all? Silence is also full of, silence is most packed with language, as you know, right? Situations create that. So I think that's all. Thank you for the question. It was very good. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Amrita, I see your hand raised, but before I give you a chance to speak, I'll request Dr. Ananya to please speak up her question.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Singh. I am Dr. Ananya Barua. I teach in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. And I must appreciate, I loved the neat layout of the way you have put the topic. I just had a small query, which is in all the context of Rasa and Anubhava, where would you put the status of Leela, of Krishna in present day theater? And Krishna, of course, with his flute, we do know that he acknowledged, that life, just like the flute is filled with holes and emptiness, but one can create magical music within it. So much so that from flute, when he is with absolute in sync, in alignment with his own energies, he is on an absolute mute, that flute to mute, as in mute here, I'm intending it in the word of silence. And can we then ascertain that the larger truths of Atma and Paramatma gets aligned from this very concept, for then the very concept of silence becomes deafening. So how would your take be from the musical instrument of Krishna's flute in present day theatrical performances? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, the flute, the musical instrument, the music are very integral part of the theater performance and experience, or any performance as such, right? Isn't it? Now, also in this aesthetics, of course, in this aesthetic theory, there are two concepts called Natya Dharmi and Loka Dharmi, which is just that music has an very extremely important point, and in fact this is a continuation from what I was just saying with reference to the question asked by Rakesh. Rakesh, or not Rajesh, Rakesh, I guess. Yes. So
Rakesh, yes.
Rajesh, okay, yeah, Rakesh. So the thing is this, that the music is that which completes the, if you're talking the movement, motion from the individual to the universal self, music is extremely important, because it's the one that kind of extends one. Why? Because this leads us to a very interesting question, which I sometimes ask my students, which is this, that vocal music and instrumental music, what do you think is more important? Important, not the right word to use here, but let's say, more closer to the representation, or more closer to the evocation of moods as such. Instrumental music and vocal music is quite debatable. Obviously, vocal music is, as far as the as the theory is concerned, but instrumental music is extremely important. Why is that so? Why is that so? It also leads us to the question of music. Music is important because the language that we say, even though if we hear this song of Lata Mangeshkar, I'm giving another example, of course, but we are in the same realm, okay, so you mind it. We know that it's Lata Mangeshkar singing, or it's Muhammad Rafi who's singing the song. But it happens that even when we are hearing music at a distance, like somebody's playing a guitar or somebody's playing a flute, it travels, it would experientially, it will travel a greater distance. We hear it. At times we will feel that, is this somebody who's playing the flute? And then we doubt ourselves, and maybe it's just in my mind. And then we say, no, it's still someone who's playing it. He says, yeah, I think someone somewhere. Why is that so? Because, and it's again rooted in the concept of language. Every word, forget about every word, every sound has a certain ideal length pitch, basically. And it's impossible for anybody to approximate to that ideal. What Bharata would call paravak, para or pashyanti, even Patanjali would call that. In music, that's possible. So you're absolutely right that it's the effect of music, or Krishna playing the flute, for instance, is something which is extremely kind of how should I say it? Extremely crucial to this whole experience of a universal aesthetic experience or joy. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Since we're running a little ahead of time, we'll just quickly request Amruta to proceed with the question, followed by today's chairperson's comment by Dr. Saurabh Todaria. So Amruta, you can proceed with your question first.
Thank you, sir, for a very insightful lecture. So my doubt is also very much related with what Rakesh have asked. So just like what we see in Natya Shastra, in the first chapter itself, he's talk about art form being the visible as well as audible. So these are the two sensory things that we see in most of the forms of art, right? Like be it painting or even music. There also we see, like just as you said, even silence is used as a tool that could be understood based on the dhwani or how it could be used as suggestion. But what about the other sensory experiences that we have? For example, like of taste or of touch. Like, are these sensory experiences in any way with respect to, like we call it, if we say it as art forms, can we have any kind of relations, or how we understand those kinds of sensory experiences other than that of visual as well as verbal, like auditory kind of things?
Yeah.
Because here you also mentioned like taste is as the mental, we taste the mental movements, and it's not through the eye but the perception of the mind. So what about the other like sensory experiences other than that of visual and auditory experience?
Yeah. That's a very important question, in fact. Thank you so much. See, the thing is that I used to think about this actually. Whenever I read the first chapter, and the Shabdrishya, the theatre is Shravyadrashya, and all art, poetry, including poetry performance and others. Shravya or Drishya. Why? Because, yes, of all the sense perceptions, basically, these two are most amenable to kind of transcendence. Transcendence is not the right word. Let's the movement from the physical to the universal or to the metaphysical. The hearing and seeing something as such. Whereas others are concerned, so I've talked about taste, that taste, upper taste, for instance, of let's say sweet, it can lead to that. Yes, other sense perceptions are important. Because in the beginning I said that what you see on stage is a kind of a transformation of the gross physical world into subtle elements, of course. And subtle elements are sound, taste, touch, right? All five of them, in fact. Apart from sight and sound. So apart from sight and sound, we have taste and others as well. Taste, color is very important. Color is very, very important. But then yes, touch has an importance, because in sattvic abhinay or sattvic bhava, I talked about the emotions of the mind, how it's communicated. In sattvic bhava, you have perspiration, for instance. Perspiration because one is extremely horrified at the experience of horror. There's perspiration, trembling as such. Color, because of the change of the color of face. But as you might get from what I'm answering or how I'm responding, other sense perceptions or the experiences of sense perceptions become objects of theater experience. They become objects of theater experience rather than being part of the subjective experience of theater. Yes, I mean, as an audience, if I'm very scared, of course, then I will have, let's say, perspiration or goosebumps, as they say. When you listen to a beautiful music, you feel that, right? Horripilation, you do feel that. An audience and spectator may feel it. But generally, as far as the theater theory is concerned, that these two sense perceptions and experiences are or they are part of the subjective experience. The rest becomes a part of the objective experience. Yeah, that's what it is. But a very good question. You need to think about it, perhaps. Yes, thank you. It's a good question.
Yeah, we're actually a little ahead of time. So I'll just humbly request the chairperson of today's session, Dr. Saurabh Tudaria, to make his comments and also ask if there are any other questions.
Thanks, Niharika, and what a wonderful lecture we heard today, and such a wide array of the beautiful and such a profound concepts in the Indian aesthetic theory. And we have heard the Professor Dhananjay talking about the various vibhavas, anubhavas, vyabhichari bhav, and not only that, but also nitty-gritty of that with regard to the philosophical question. So what I actually liked and would like to elaborate him on that is the philosophical query he asked, that what is that which takes from the take the spectre from the simple and the mundane act of the perception in theater to the universal consciousness. And as Professor Dhananjay has suggested, that that there is a kind of the correlation between between the individual consciousness and the universal consciousness on the basis of the three gunas. So these three gunas, or the three gunas, are basically the cosmology of that is also the ultimate ingredients of the Prakriti or the cosmos, and how through the theatrical performance at the theatrical or the literary text, the spectator who is watching that is risen to the level of he can actually experience these fundamental structures of the of three gunas. So my question would be basically, I don't know whether it is related to that, but nonetheless, the question is more would be from the modern Western aesthetic theories perspective. Like in Kant, we say when Kant talks about the aesthetic consciousness in especially the judgment of taste in the third critique. So he also talks about the freedom, that the free play between the imagination and the understanding, and for him this freedom actually produces the delight in the aesthetic object. And this delight is actually for him kind of transcending to the nomina, to the thing in itself. So this delight actually will, this delight and the freedom will actually relate the empirical self to the universal self of thing in itself. Now, but in the hermeneutical tradition, especially in Gadamer, we find the critique of that. And Gadamer says that we need to understand the aesthetic outside of this mode of the delight and the pleasure, but rather we think that the person, the spectator, is actually interpreting, because he is limited, and he is like, because we don't have a full clarity over our existence, we have the existential finitude. So when we analyze, as you mentioned about the king layer, that half king layer is that and half it is free to interpret. So this freedom to interpretation actually makes the literary text or the theoretical performance delightful, or kind of, or the aesthetic object. So I don't know I make sense, but that is what I would like to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you, Dr. Saurav. Yeah. Yes, it's been a while since I read Kant, but what I'll say is that in the Indian thought, if I combine Dhwani theory with Ras theory, you can see a combination of Kant and Gadamer, because the pleasure, the aesthetic pleasure that he talks about, the fact that you can transcend the limitations of the concepts that understanding provides you, and imagination, especially in sublime, basically, as you know, that
Yes.
sublime. That's what the experience of sublime is, a pleasurable experience, right? Isn't it? Because the ability or the realization of the mind that it can create beyond the constraints of understanding. That's what Kant presents there. In the Dhwani theory, one can interpret a similar line of thought. One can, even in Abhinavagupta also, but because you mentioned both, so I want to kind of combine it. You can interpret both, because, and I'll take just one minute to finish this. This is that Anandavardhan, to begin with, in his Dhvanyaloka, wherein he gives the concept of Rasadhvani, basic argument is this, that even though all functions of language we know, all levels of meaning that we know, which is Abhidha, Lakshana, Tatparya, is primary meaning, then the figurative meaning, and sentential meaning, yet there is a meaning in all great works of art and literature, art I'm saying, that there's a fourth meaning that he says that only a sensitive critic is a translation that can contribute to the poem, for instance. So, and that meaning is a meaning which is beyond the existing concepts, cognitive concepts of cognition, let's say, of logic. And since it is creative and imaginative, and it works by mere suggestion, it works by suggestion, basically. The greatest kind of it is Rasadhvani. In fact, I don't have time. So it involves a kind of the example that I give is this. The example that I want to give is the beginning of Dhvanyaloka, where he is comparing the claws, basically, claws of Narsimha with the moon, basically, with the moon. And you'll find that how the Kantian understanding of aesthetics comes here, because the claws, a single claw, let's say, of Narsimha is like the moon in terms of its shape. That's how is the imagination of the poet. But then it can also kind of reduce the pain of a devotee, which the moon cannot. The first moon cannot. So this extra meaning that one kind of gets here, a different concept that one gets here, that a different meaning that one gets here is created, and that's what it's Dhvani. But then it's all amenable. It all depends upon the interpretation, in fact, of the reader as such, right? Isn't it? That's what there's there's a lot of understanding about doing a kind of comparative study of Indian hermeneutic thought and the German hermeneutic thought. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for the wonderful lecture and also for very insightful replies to all the questions. So as we are a little ahead of time, please note that all the questions in the chat box will be replied to by our official email ID. I see 4 questions right now in the chat. So just because we are running a little ahead of time, we will revert back to you on these questions. So I would formally like to thank Professor Dhananjay Singh on behalf of Professor Sangeeta Menon and Team CSP for the wonderful lecture, and also Dr. Saurabh Toraria for chairing this session, and Meera Menon for being a wonderful coordinator for Friday lectures. The upcoming lecture, as each Friday we bring to you a new speaker and a new lecture. The upcoming one is a very special one, which talks about, it's from a very well-known author of the book Writing the Self in Illness. It is by Amla Pulli, and she will be talking about on life, writing about illness. She's also a researcher in health humanities at Western University. So stay tuned with us like each Friday, and we'll bring to you a very interesting speaker and a very interesting topic. So thank you all for participation for today's lecture and always being with us, for your support. So thank you everyone. Have a great evening. Thank you from Team CSP. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.